It is mid-August, and while that may be the dog days to some, it is the dart days to us. Welcome to Chucking Darts, a podcast of informed, rigorous, reckless, harmless, speculative, and fun predictions about the game we love. You can call me Chuck. This is episode probably like 229, thereabouts. I think the last episode released on my feed was my draft reaction episode, which would have been right at the end of June, so a little less than 2 months ago. There's been, a natural hiatus, but I haven't really spoken about the NBA offseason, the free agency trades, all of that. That will be part of today's episode. Hopefully, it will be covered in more detail soon. But I wanted to talk about the NBA Finals. I wanted to talk about lessons from the playoffs. And now that we have some remove from that tournament and from the draft and from summer league, I wanted to see what lessons teams may have learned and whether or not they are the right lessons to take away. And to help me do that is a frequent guest, a buddy who I got to meet in person for the first time at Summer League, ACC expert, co-host of the Busby podcast, credentialed at Cameron Indoor and all ACC points, in between. Brian Geisinger. How are you, Brian? Welcome back, man.
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back on. It was lovely meeting you out in Vegas in person for the first time, along with a few other people. That was my maiden voyage out to Las Vegas for Summer League, and man, Summer League, it was a lot of fun. Like, it was just a lot. Like, endless basketball. Like, I think only going out there for a couple of days is like the right dosage, but it is fun to just absolutely max out on it.
Yeah.
And obviously meet up with some buddies along the way too. I had a great time, and I'm
Look,
happy
yeah.
to be back on here as well.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it, man. I think we were sitting next to one another, I think, for the Jacob Timmy Alex Sarr fireworks factory. I
Mhm.
think that was one of the games we watched, Wizards Nets. And look, the Summer League, anytime anyone talks about Summer League, it's some combination of like, oh, Vegas, it's the worst, or like, oh, what the point is,
Yeah,
that concourse is still great going in between the two gyms as long as you know what day to go. I think we hung
yeah.
out on the Sunday, which is when
Yep.
it had emptied out a little bit, which is
First
nice.
Sunday. Yep, yep.
And it's very easy to have a good time. That's the bottom line, is if you're there to watch hoops, it is very, very easy to have a good time. And I got to meet you and a bunch of other people in person and really enjoy myself. And it was great. So
Yep.
I have no regrets about going. I will try to go next year as well. Hope to meet more of the fine folks who I collaborate with and who do this work. Now, we're not going to start at Summer League. I want to start way, 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 way back. Seems like ancient history now with the NBA playoffs and the NBA finals. And the way that this episode is going to work is that I want to see what sort of trends may have presented themselves in the playoffs or in the finals. First of all, congratulations to the Oklahoma City Thunder and their fans. Shout out Sean Darenthal, scout for them, who, is a friend of the program, previously appeared. Uh, Fantastic. Amazing accomplishment. Cannot, that flag will fly forever. And they were the best team all season and they won the title. I could probably go on a lengthy digression about how I think the Pacers would have won that game if Haliburton hadn't gotten hurt, but what happened, and the Thunder won, and it's not their fault. So congratulations to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Uh, the Pacers, holy shit, what a legendary playoff run. They hope they hang their heads high. I think Myles Turner leaving has now sort of like it's already, I think, maybe faded the memory a little bit of how magical that run was, especially knowing Halliburton's going to be out. But really, a signature series, something that I think had, especially given the size of the markets involved, really did reach sort of a crossover level that I really wish the NBA could have taken advantage of more. It's hard to imagine a more striking glimpse of like the future of where I think the sport is going than those finals with these stars that maybe the casual fan was not completely familiar with. It really felt like a moment where uh if the league had better leveraged its infrastructure to market the hell out of this series, then maybe it would even have been more successful, which is what I wish it were. But nonetheless, we're here to focus on the hoops. Is there any takeaway from the finals, Brian, that you think did like the finals reveal a certain truth to you or a lesson that you believe has carried through in the offseason for any given team?
Well, here, Chuck. I thought we were going to be talking about the summer league finals, but I guess we'll talk it. We'll stick with the second rate finals here, which was the actual June finals. Both of
Sure.
which were very fun to watch throughout the summer months here. The question was sort of like what biggest takeaways from
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 the
a from a
finals.
sort of future of the league roster building, like
Yeah,
not like, man, SGA might be the GOAT. Like that's
yeah,
great. No,
right,
there's not really
right.
a lesson to learn for any team.
So
But yeah.
one of the things to pull away as sort of like thinking these two teams are driven by a lot of different stuff, and I think we'll probably get into some of the depths or the wings that they have and the versatility in the front court, like all that type of stuff. But to think about like where the two rosters really start, and with Indy, Tyrese Haliburton, with OKC, SGA, and obviously Jalen Williams, J Dub, who was just unbelievable. I mean, he was
Yeah.
unbelievable all season, but the way he responded in the playoffs after one or two sort of like blah performances, the way he just like came out in the finals, just unbelievable. But having these sort of like uber creators that can score from multiple levels, can pass, can all in like sort of different ways, but all like very good shooters. Halliburton
Hmm.
like being just like an unbelievable one of the best shooters in the world. Shea being one of the best mid-range shooters in the world. Jay Williams being a guy from multiple levels of the court, like a very efficient shooter. Um, but three guys that also don't turn the ball over. And so the thought I'd sort of had was like as teams are trying to squeeze and just like wring as much efficiency
Hmm.
as they possibly can. And for a long time, like the inefficiency that was exploited for the better part of a decade now was just like, upping rim rate and upping, catch and shoot 3-point attempts, right? And like upping 3-point attempts in general, but like I think more specifically, it was sort of like how can you like get to the paint so that you can get more 3-point attempts and more free throw attempts. And if you're sort of like looking along that like the four factors, you're looking at free throw attempt rate, offensive rebound rate. Well, one of the other fourth factors would be turnover rate. And I
Hmm.
think that is one of those things where that's sort of like whether this is sort of like they stumbled into it by design or by accident, but just having these like, high usage guys, all-star level creators, franchise defining guys in terms of like what they can do to set guys up or get buckets themselves um, in the like ability to take care of the ball is something that I think really jumps out. They're not the only guys in the league, obviously. There's probably some others we could name, but as teams are going to play faster, they're going to be sprinting into even more, spread pick and roll, more pistol action, more double drag, and trying to like play out of it. Um, you need like the guy that's sort of like pushing it and leading the team from sort of like top ball handler standpoint is going to be. I think there's just going to be even more of an emphasis on guys who make good decisions with the ball and avoid turnovers. And like I mean, I think even at the top of the draft, maybe this is sort of cherry picking, but just like look at some of the guys who went early in the draft. Cooper
Hmm.
Flagg, unbelievable decision maker, right? Like
Hmm.
that's like it was of the superpowers that he flashed at Duke last season, that was certainly one of them. Just makes quick decisions, excellent with the ball, takes care of it, values it, and like delivers it to teammates who are open. Dylan Harper, another one of those guys, high usage, high assist rate, low turnover rate. Knueppel at the fourth pick to the Hornets, another guy, maybe not a true true primary if you want to like use that term, but a guy that like plays with the ball a lot, gives you a lot of usage, gives you a lot of playmaking, also good at taking care of the ball. So I think maybe you saw that
Same
a
with Trey
little bit.
Johnson, by the
Yeah,
way.
yeah, he's
Low
another. That's
low
another.
turnover guy.
No,
Yeah.
I think probably around like 11-12% turnover rate. And I know he was maybe a little more of like a catch and shoot guy, but he played with the ball a lot this season
Yes,
at
he did.
Texas.
Hmm.
And yeah, he's another great example. So if you're looking at, I mean, again, that's four of the top six picks, right? You know what I mean? And the other two guys are, Edgecombe and and Bailey are wings. So you know how you can sort of like see how it splits a little bit there. But that was sort of my like the most obvious takeaway, I thought.
Hmm.
Um, any thoughts on that, or did you have anything to sort of like piggyback off of it?
Yeah, certainly. I think first of all, for those of you who have, you know, very loyally consumed my episodes, you know that Brian and I have spoken about Knueppel and Cooper Flagg quite a bit. So just this is not going to be the last time we mention Khan in this episode. Fear not, the Hornets are going to be coming hopefully in the back half. But I think that as far as the turnover thing, that is sort of a marriage of that's kind of like what's old is new again. You can find the
Mhm.
oldest of old heads and they're going to be like, yeah, of course you don't turn the ball over. Like I was, when I played varsity and such, we did all these drills about how you never like whatever. That it's always been a tenet of um coaching and fundamentals that you do not turn the ball over. Where I think there's the dominant mode of low turnover ball now, which is the a very quick way to low turnovers is to have an ISO heavy initiator who is so comfortable and so skilled and can get to their spots so easily that the only passes, like they are not forced into any passes that they do not want to make, and that they are so good at getting theirs that their passing windows are going to be very wide. And so they're lowering their own turnover rate just through the threat of their bucket getting. Jalen Brunson is a lot like this with the Knicks as well. I mean, they are a
Yeah.
low turnover team and were a low turnover team in the playoffs, not because they ran the most intricate sets, really for the opposite reason, which is because the more you simplify things, if you just put it in the hands of a very, very skilled guy, you're not going to turn the ball over as much. I think that the Thunder are closer to that than the Pacers were because the Pacers are this whole other thing. Like the Pacers descend from sort of the 2010s Mavs era of Rick Carlisle teams
Mhm.
where they, what you hear a lot is randomness. What the Mavericks used to call it was flow, 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 flow by populating the court with so many decision makers that the ball was constantly being initiated in some way. Even if that's just
Mhm.
attacking the closeout, it's attacking the closeout with an initiator's mind where you're still scanning and mapping the floor at multiple levels so that, again, your passing windows are going to be wide and your decision making is going to stay ahead of the defenses.
Mhm.
What makes Haliburton so incredible as a player is that his low turnover percentage comes with him getting on and off the ball like a lot. He is not an ISO heavy player. He can play that way, but that's not how he likes to play. And in fact, I think the Thunder tried to play him into more isolation looks to limit that sort of random poppiness that or flow or whatever that Carlisle ball, the Carlisle Halliburton hybrid ball that the Pacers love to play. And I think if you're trying to take a lesson into how to build a team off of that, and you look to the top of the draft, I think that Flagg and Knueppel are more Carlisle adjacent, I would
Mhm.
say, whereas Trey Johnson and Dylan Harper are more kind of like Brunson or SGA adjacent, so to speak. And that's like lofty comparisons for either one of those prospects. Obviously, I'm talking about, second team all NBA and up here. But like Harper, I've compared to Brunson that he has been sort of this guy can be a bigger Brunson if he can ever approach Brunson's level of, footwork, skill, touch,
Mhm.
Brunson's like a much better player, obviously, than Dylan Harper is. But as someone who lacks the high end athleticism, that's the kind of guy that I think Harper really needs to emulate if he's going to reach where he wants to go. Someone who can dominate from, in the mid range, basically find shots that would be contested jumpers to other people, but are more like layups for him, the way that it is for Brunson. And that because his handle and his driving ability are his two best qualities, you could put the ball in his hands and sort of ensure a low turnover game just by him dribbling around. But there's obviously several giant leaps to take if you're going to be a low turnover team who still scores at a rate that is, at the top of the league efficiency wise or contender wise. Trey Johnson, not the distributor that Harper is. And, he isn't even really a lead guard at Texas the way that SGA emerged as a lead guard in Kentucky when he was there. But another guy who just like, he's a guy who understands that as long as you can rise up from any area of the floor at any time and be comfortable doing so, that's going to be its own form of like somewhat efficient basketball because you're not going to be giving the other team extra chances. So I think it's important to identify what kind of low turnover team you are seeking to build. And I think building either is incredibly difficult. You have to have these outlier talents leading it, right? I think because I find that Pacers style of play very seductive in the same way that there are some light years heads that are just always going to be for the Warriors brand of ball and split cuts and constant movement with Steph as this off-ball pawn. In the same way that there's, that Kerr came from the triangle offense and sort of imputed that and modernized it with Golden State. I think that sort of off-ball threat, which I think Knueppel and Flagg are more at home doing. That's the kind of stuff that really appeals to me. And that's why a big reason why I ranked Flagg and Knueppel number one and number two on my board in the draft is because their ability to play on or off the ball. Because if for example, Dylan Harper, he gets to play with Victor Wembanyama and he's going to start playing off the ball immediately because they have De'Aaron Fox, they just inked him. So maybe he becomes this more balanced player in terms of his on and off ball contributions. But if you're a high dribble creator, high dribble initiator, um, then like the curve in the NBA, the mountain that you have to climb is so steep because there's so many players who can do that and do it so well that I think that the teams who sign up for that are just signing up for a very, very long road. It's just there's draft tunnel vision every year. Every team in the top 10 falls in love with whoever they draft. That's sort of the nature of the psychology of making a pick. But if you're drafting a guy who you think is going to be your number one scoring option and they play that more ball dominant style, like they have to tiptoe through a graveyard of guys who just like get overwhelmed by players like Donovan Mitchell or
Mhm.
Jason Tatum or Luca or
Yep.
whomever. Like that, like it's just so hard to be great at that relative to NBA talent would be what I would say.
Can I like I think this is maybe just a almost like a cheap example to grab, but like especially the last few things you said here, like it really has me thinking about LaMelo Ball a lot.
Yeah, of
Because
course.
this is a guy, when he came in, I thought obviously his rookie season, he was brilliant. And I think one of the sort of like underrated aspects of that rookie year was, James Borrego, good offensive coach. But the Hornets had like sneakily had like a good number of playmakers that season. They
Hmm.
drafted LaMelo. Devontae Graham was still there. Terry Rozier is there. Gordon Hayward is there. Malik Monk is having like a breakout season. And Miles Bridges was like made a jump as a player too. And so all of a sudden the Hornets had like six guys, you know what I mean, that could like credibly like initiate, pick and roll to some extent. And they had a guy in Rozier who could also like, run around screens and bend defenses with that. And I thought the like Hornets ball movement, sort of like blender aspects of their offense were like that was like the most fun parts about LaMelo. Is like you'd get to see him, sort of like divvy up his role between like obviously a lot of pick and roll, but some spot ups, some cuts, some connective passing, get out in transition a little bit more. And then just like slowly through like roster transition, guys leaving, guys getting traded out, guys leaving in free agency like Malik Monk. Just like more and more, the offense started getting routed through LaMelo, and that led to some good things. Like his second year, he was an All Star, and I think much of his failings the last couple of years have had to do with just like injuries,
Hmm.
but also like they've just as the roster's gotten worse, more stuff fell on his plate to be for LaMelo to be like more of that like dribble, dribble, dribble. We're just running however many dozens of pick and rolls with this guy per game. Yeah, as opposed to putting him in a setting where you're being like very, very delicate and like very maybe not delicate actually. I would say maybe let back that up. Where you're being very aggressive to sort of like space the floor. You're playing PJ Washington at center, or you're playing the 6'7" guy at center. You're doing everything you can to like space the floor, and then you're just loading it up with ball movers and guys who can pass, dribble, shoot. And it was pretty good. Like it was in the second year of it, when LaMelo's an all-star, even though they've lost Monk and Graham.
And that's
That
their
was
play-in year, right? They make the play in that year.
They made the play in both of those years, but in the second year, they're a top six offense in the NBA.
Yeah.
And for whatever it's worth, too, LaMelo is one of those guys that like does fall in the like category of high usage, low turnover.
Yeah.
Now he I think even he's under 15% turnover rate for his career. Like I know the rep on LaMelo is this guy's wild with the basketball. He does crazy stuff. He's actually a pretty low turnover player. His decision making concerns come with like, well, off the court, and then also like the fact that he just shoots the ball too much, and maybe that deflates some of the turnover numbers as well. Like
Right. Right.
instead of trying to drive or force the pass in, he's taking a 28 footer off the dribble 3 seconds into the shot clock, like whatever. But like I think there's this narrative on him that he's like super duper reckless, and it's like he actually takes quite good care of the basketball, and like the numbers tend to support that. But I just think the Hornets lost the plot with like creating this sort of like ecosystem around him. Whereas a team like the Pacers, who since they got like Carlisle and Haliburton in the room together, have been just dedicated to crafting this environment, this ecosystem, right? And I do think they'll miss. I mean, like losing Turner is tough because I think he was a big part of that. I think his his versatility as a screen setter and an offensive player, and his ability. I know he didn't basically couldn't make a three in the finals, but just like in most cases, his ability to threaten as a pop guy was a big portion of that, and I think it allowed them to take these very simple like NBA like go-to structures, pistol, double drag, and play random out of it because they had everything spaced so well. You have a collection of where all five guys can shoot and pass, and then you've got just a wizard like Haliburton, sort of like at the gears. And The hope would be that for a team like the Hornets, that they would be able to replicate something like that with Lamelo, but that's easier said than done.
Of course. I mean, and it also comes with a lot of repetition. You got to be healthy
Mhm.
and be on the court. But like
Yeah.
there's a way to read the last couple of years with Lamelo and Charlotte, and you could draw. I'm tempted to do this. I'm not necessarily advising this, but you can read it psychologically and just say Lamelo had this great early success, and top selling jersey in the league, all of this that just meant that the Hornet, like, he was just gonna rule the roost in Charlotte for a little while, and they were gonna cater to him whether or not he was exercising that control actively or passively. Like, the team was just gonna sort of bend toward him, and maybe he himself didn't really realize what the best style of play for winning was, or maybe he had to grow into learning it. Maybe he's still growing into learning it. The tempting psychological distinction to make between him and Haliburton is just like he's just like a genius.
Mhm.
He is and he has not ever insisted on being a lead guard in the traditional ball dominant way. He spent 2 years at Iowa State. He was an off guard his freshman year, and then he was a lead guard his second year. He goes to Sacramento. He's an off guard of De'Aaron Fox, and he has no problem with that. He's not agitating to be the starting point guard. He's not coming to them with some ultimatum that it's him or me, which makes that trade all the more baffling and painful from Sacramento's side. But he has always just gotten it. Like, he's always just had an innate sense of when to add and when to subtract. And saying that LaMelo does not have the same calibration is just to say that, like, he's not on the level of arguably like the best young player in the league at that is. Like,
Mhm.
Haliburton is more finely tuned about how to run a team without insisting on himself than basically anyone in the league. Maybe save for Steph, and Steph is, a good 12 years older than he is. So I think there's a tempting way to read it that way, which there might be truth in that. But the other part is that there's been so much stability in Indiana with
Mhm.
Carlisle coming there, and they've always been an incredibly stable organization, have always been good about, having very reliable veterans and knowing which players to sort of target without sacrificing future assets. Like, they're not a wild organization at all. And so every move by them is very intentional. You would know better than me about sort of, whatever turmoil might exist behind the scenes in Charlotte, but like, we know that Borrego was there and then he wasn't there, and
It,
the front office is turned over as well, and you've had off court stuff that sucks, yeah, with
yeah.
multiple players there. And so it's hard to put all of that on LaMelo. I think the lesson in contrasting the Hornets with the Pacers is just that the Pacers are the outlier example of basically everything going right up until that first quarter in game 7 where his Achilles snaps. Like, every decision on the margins, more or less, they are nailing. Like, they get Nemhard in the second round. They get Siakam more or less for a song and make sure they trade for him at the nadir of his value when he's got 1 foot out the door in Toronto and Ujiri has waited too long to deal him. Like, the guy that they acquire in Siakam is another guy who's over himself because he was a late first round pick and spent a lot of time in college. It's not as though he's going to come to this new team looking to demand the ball in a way that he had. Like, it's all smooth. It's all guys who just wanted to play and wanted to
Mhm.
win. And they integrate that with targeting like Obi Toppin on his second team, knowing that he's also just like looking to play and contribute and knowing that he's got more. It's Team building is a very delicate thing, and these moves just need to have intent behind them, a lot of intent. And if there's one area where you start to make sacrifices in that regard, and you start to say to yourself, well, I'll take a swing on this guy because we're I mean, I don't want to dump on Salon. I think I actually might be higher on Salon than some other people are, but like
Mhm.
that pick in that time where you're gonna have to take a step back to take two steps forward as you're trying to find your footing with Lamelo, like that is gonna back everything up. And like the Pacers are the example of an organization who I do not think would have made that move. They populate themselves with guys that kind of basically know how to play or that they can very smoothly fit into a role, you
Mhm.
know? So that's how I would sort of contrast those two situations.
Yeah, and I mean the Thunder have this too, right? Like the where
Right.
like this like very intentional team build and like look, the decision to jettison Josh Giddey a year ago made sense for a bunch of different reasons. They saw how he was defended in the playoffs. They had the chance to get Alex Caruso for a great price on their regard. But look, I'm not on the Thunder beat by any means, but just like if that's a guy who had any sort of issue with what his role sort of like looked like in this like ecosystem and how he felt and how he was perceived, like whatever, it's like you're not going to waste any more time on that. You know what I mean? It's like let's sell this guy when we can, and then
Right.
they happen to get like literally the perfect guy in return. Like it's just a
Right.
stroke of genius, and then just like the Bulls being like not good at team building, and being just sort of like giving up on this guy.
Or just like aimless, like aimless.
Yes,
That's where
yeah.
they're just like,
Well,
but in their defense, in the Bulls' defense, like an NBA adage that is still probably preached by a good amount of front offices is just get the talent and figure the fit out later. I mean,
yeah,
that
yeah.
you hear that in the draft every year. You still hear it that it's best player
Mhm.
available, which I've never, I mean, there's something to be said for it, but if it was just as simple as best player available, then so
Yeah,
many teams would not get it wrong so much of the time. It would be very easy. You would just identify the best player and draft them. But that
yeah,
team building is considerably more nuanced than that, in my opinion. And
yeah.
yeah,
I feel like these two things, even in sort of like draft savvy circles or sort of like adjacent to that, it's often done underneath like, oh, is your school thought best player available, or is it like drafting for like need? Do you know what I mean? And it's like, no, there's actually like other pathways for
right,
this
right.
too. That are taking way more factors into uh fit, style, not just like positional need. I
Right.
think that's something that's like definitely worth pointing out. Um, yeah, I
Here,
mean, look, the Hornets have been aimless, and they look. I think they still may look like aimless to people. Maybe they still do look aimless to plenty of other people. Like they're not a good team right now. They're not on track to be good this next season. But like, I do think with the sale of the ownership, the Michael Jordan no longer being the majority owner of the team, them changing the front office, them changing the coaching staff, like they have the chance now. Like options are on the table for them
I
because
agree.
there's more patience. There's the willingness to take like a multi-yeared and multi-tiered approach to team building, which is something they just were not going to do under Michael Jordan. Like period, it was not going to like a 1 year mini tank if you stink. Sure, you could get away with that, but you weren't going to do like a like a sort of like tear down rebuild that was going to take 2 to 3 years. It was just not going to happen underneath the previous ownership. The current owners, at least for the time being, seem to be willing to hire the right people, give them the resources, and then try to just put the right people in the right place to make the right decisions and like help and like facilitate as much as they can, but just let those guys know they have time and job security to like do this sort of like organically the right way. We'll see how it works out. The salon pick, that's maybe a whole other conversation to get into. Like
Yeah, I
my
mean, yeah,
biggest gripes with them though for this was like, they draft Lamelo falls to them at pick 3 in 2020. Like pure, they move up in the draft lottery to get the third pick, and then the Warriors draft Wiseman too. And like, I mean, I was actually thinking about this earlier when you were talking about um, sort of like the Kerr's offense versus maybe sort of like the Rick Carlisle offense and sort of how these things diverge, converge, whatever. Like it would have been fascinating if like Lamelo had ended up in Golden
Of
State's
course.
offense. I think
Or if Haliburton had.
I
Yeah.
think about that probably once a week. Like I'm glad he's in Charlotte, obviously, but like he would have been, dude, he would have been awesome. I mean, Halliburton too would have been just unbelievable. Those guys are like tailor made for that, in my
Or
opinion. Like
or
that kind of
Franz
approach.
Wagner a year
Yeah,
later. Like,
right.
of
But
course. Yeah.
so I think a lot of people where they think the Hornets like rebuild underneath LaMelo starting in 2020, where they think it like really went sideways was like the decision to sign Gordon Hayward. That was probably not a great idea. It's probably one I wouldn't have done, but I got it. I understood it, even though they had to like stretch Nick Batum to actually like get that transaction done. But they were saying we want a high field player next to LaMelo, someone who can absorb some of the playmaking duties, someone that can help him with matchups, someone that can shoot from multiple levels, be a passer, be a screener. So I understood it, even though I didn't necessarily agree with it. Where this team really dropped the ball is the next two drafts that take place after they have LaMelo, which is their 2021 draft. They have 3 picks in the top 40. James Bouknight, lottery pick. Kai Jones, they trade back into the first round with New York. And then they take Kai Jones in the 20, and then they take JT Thor in early in the second round. Like those guys are
Yeah.
basically not in the league now. Whiff, just a total whiff. And I mean, in defense of those guys, they were landing in a bad situation. Just again, sort of like an aimless franchise that didn't really quite know what it was doing and was just like not ready to develop them. And then in 2022, and this is really the summer where this like the wheels fall off for Charlotte. MJ fires James Borrego even like 9 months after that they had extended to him, but clearly they were embarrassed getting blown out, I believe, by the Pacers in the play-in game, and they fire him. They don't actually have a coach hired during the draft. They hire Kenny Atkinson, and then like a week later, he decides to leave and goes back to Golden State. A few weeks after winning the title with them, you have Miles Bridges gets arrested that summer, and then in the 2022 draft, they actually have two top 15 picks. They have pick 13 and pick 15.
Mm-hmm.
And they have pick 15 because they signed and traded Devontae Graham to the New Orleans Pelicans the previous summer in 2021, which was like probably the best transaction.
Yeah. What a
Mitch
coup
Kupchak.
for
It's
Devontae Graham. It's
it's hands
incredible.
down. And like it was one of those things that I think it came down to like the last day of the season, like whether it was going to be conveyed or not, like because it was protected lottery. But with the 13th pick, they draft Jalen Duren, which seems perfect. You're like, oh man, this is perfect. They needed a lob guy for LaMelo. This
Right.
guy's young, he's physical, he can rebound, he can face up, he can pass, he can hand off, like all of this great stuff. And he gets up there and he puts on the hat. And like, it's for a second, it's like, wow, they're doing the thing. They drafted the guy. And then it comes in, not too long after that, that they're trading the 13th pick. And they're trading it to Detroit, and they're getting a like mostly just like fodder in return. And the best thing that they get in return for that, the number 13th pick, the draft pick, was what was basically Denver's 2023 pick, the year Denver wins the title. So that turns into Nick Smith Jr., who I think has a
Oh.
chance to not even make the roster this season. So like
Yeah.
now you draft Mark Williams with the 15th pick,
Mm-hmm.
and you're trading him less than 2 years later, basically. That was the environment that LaMelo was having to like come up in. Like
Yeah.
think about how dysfunctional and bad that is from like an asset management standpoint. And the only reason the Hornets wanted to trade that 13th pick was because they didn't want that salary, like the rookie salary slot for the 13th pick on the books, because they wanted to be able to give Miles Bridges a max contract and stay under the tax before the season started.
Oh, my God.
So like the lessons to be learned from this are like vast and wide. But if I were to like sort of like tie it back into sort of like what we started talking about tonight, it would be that like teams that are like routinely, I think, like building organically, building through the draft, building through smart, savvy moves on the margins. They value their draft picks.
Yes.
They take advantage of it. Like this was something that got talked about a lot, I think, with the Pacers. Like how many of their guys were, a second round pick like Neesmith, or like mid first round pick like Neesmith that was a castaway, or someone like Toppin that was on his second team, like whatever. And like good teams capital. I know the Pacers didn't draft all those guys; they traded for some of them. But the point is, like, if you
But when Neesmith was part of the Hayward sign and trade, wasn't he? Was he not? Isn't that how they got him?
I don't think so. We'll have to double check that. But like,
Maybe not. Maybe I'm misremembering.
I
I
was
thought
thinking
that was
of.
a
I think that
three-teamer,
was the
like a
Brogdon. I think that was the Brogdon
right.
trade.
Okay,
I
okay,
think
okay.
It was
That's
the
what I'm
Brogdon
thinking of.
trade. Well, like
That's what I'm thinking.
initially in the fall of 2020, because you have to remember, like because of COVID, the offseason timeline was different. Like I think there was some thought that Hayward would leave Boston for Indiana, perhaps in a sign and trade.
Right.
And then the Hornets came up with a larger offer for him, and then that caused everyone to have to like scramble around to different plans. Um, but you have to take advantage of this of all. You have limited um, team building. You're constrained in different ways from like how you can build a roster,
Yeah.
and you just can't throw away lottery picks like that. And the
Well,
Hornets doing it in the stupidest way possible was incredibly confusing and frustrating.
well, I remember the Dallas Mavericks in the 2013 draft. So the story goes, they traded the 13th pick to the Celtics to move down for like not for, basically because of the salary slot. They still got, I think, maybe a nominal first. I think they ended up taking Shane Larkin. The Celtics end up taking Kelly Olynyk, but uh Donnie Nelson, I believe, if I'm getting these names wrong, I apologize, is like pleading with Cuban to draft Giannis. He goes, "This guy's good. Like, please draft him." And Cuban's like, "The salary slot's going to affect our ability to sign Dwight Howard in free agency, so we can't do it." Like whenever you're looking at your first round pick draft slot as the money you think that you need to
Oh
cut,
man.
that's the problem. I guarantee you there is some veteran on your roster that you can offload who you already know is not good, as
Mhm.
opposed to a draft pick who you could take and could become a Hall of Famer. The
Yeah.
chance might be slim, but it's a higher chance than the veteran you already know is not going to be one. So, yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, and that's the sort of, I mean, that's low hanging fruit, so to speak. That's
Hmm.
stuff that, again, should have been apparent 30 years ago and is just as apparent now.
Yep.
I think one of the popular terms that arose during this playoffs throughout the rounds was weak link theory. And that
Hmm.
was in leading up to the draft, which is basically now I think maybe 5 years ago, there was this, and I mean, it's still the case, but like it was very, very popular to say that the trend in the NBA was like, well, if you can't shoot, like teams are going to ignore you. That's still the case, obviously, but like you can't be ignorable on offense. And now I think the fashionable thing to say is that you cannot be targetable on defense. That if you're someone that an offense can pick at, then like you're going to be played off the floor. Again, both of these things sound simple enough, but like it's very, very smart front offices figure this stuff out before other ones do. I want to know what your thought is on weak link theory, so to speak. Like, for example, I think that this theory gets applied, for example, to like Darius Garland on the Cavs. If you're going to be such a high minute guy, or maybe to Brunson on the Knicks. Again, most important offensive player there is, but they're a little bit undersized. They can get bullied on mismatches, that they can get targeted, so to speak. I think with small guards, it's kind of clear that that's always going to be a hurdle. With players on the wing who are a little bit bigger, do you think that that sort of theory, the weak link theory, is one that number one has like was borne out overall in the playoffs? And number two, do you think any team, and maybe starting with the Hornets, have like made selections in light of it? or following it or trying to incorporate it in some way?
Potentially, I think just starting off the what you just sort of finished there, like I think we talked about this on BuzzBeat a little bit when we were like leading up to the draft and we were talking about Khan versus Trey Johnson, two
Hmm.
prospects who I liked both quite a bit. I liked Khan more, but I liked Trey a lot. But if you were sort of going off this sort of like weak link theory, both in terms of lineup construction, team building, whatever, someone like Khan who stronger uh, player, I would say that Trey obviously a dynamic shooter. Khan is as well. Trey does some stuff better than Khan. Khan does some stuff better than Trey, and I just think Khan had this ability to, I think because of his like strength and sturdiness and his like quickness as a decision maker and as a shooter, just seemed like someone that you could maybe not quite copy and paste onto the floor of the NBA Finals this year, but like you could envision him.
Hmm.
And there absolutely is Trey Johnson's a lights out shooter with a great wingspan. Like maybe he becomes a better defender in the NBA and he's going to get stronger. He won't be as skinny, but just like there's certain ways you can pick on that guy defensively that you can't do with Khan. And teams are going to go after Khan, and he's going to, give up drive-bys on the perimeter, or whatever. But because he is 6'6", 220 pounds, and a psycho competitor, like he's not, you can't go at him certain ways that teams, I think, in the playoffs when these become sort of like matchup heavy scenarios, he's just a little less vulnerable. Does that is that
Especially against, yeah, it does make sense. But
yeah.
I think, again, one thing that made the Pacers so distinguishable is that they committed to their style and their speed. And the Thunder played very fast as well.
Mhm.
But those two teams committed to their style and their speed all the way in to the point where it really was only until they played one another that they like seemed like they got tired, and like just the absolute zenith that those teams were reaching in terms of ground coverage and tracking closeouts and switching off the ball and gunning for transition, like every chance they got, up and down, up and down, up and down. That I think that's when you finally saw both those teams wear down, was in the
Mhm.
finals. Against any other opponent, they always had the opponent playing on the back foot. And I think when you wear down against a team who can play that fast and that way, it's the again, it's something that's been around for a while, but that's when, quote, the game slows down. The idea is just that in the playoffs, the game slowing down usually applies to both teams because they're both tired. And when you get tired, it becomes much more isolation heavy. You can hunt mismatches still, but those mismatches tend to be an ISO. And I think if a team wanted to play that way against Khan, you might win some battles, but the more you try to bully Khan, the more the odds are turning in his favor. If you
Yeah.
come at him with some sort of, and I know we're projecting like deep playoff
Mhm.
philosophy onto Khan, which is like a fun thing to do in mid-August. But I'm just saying, if a team tries to half-heartedly attack him just by saying, well, it's isolation and we'll just do that, that's more playing into his hands because he wants contact. He's very comfortable with contact. He can bump guys without fouling them, and he can position himself well. And that's when isolation ball is going to become less efficient. Again, against a team, now if Khan's playing a team like OKC or Indiana, who can play so fast and commit to it all of the time, then a team like that is going to have more success. Um, but I wanted to talk about that weak link theory
Yeah, yeah.
a bit more, especially in discussing the Pacers, because I think obviously, yes, if you are relentlessly targetable on defense, that is going to be a problem. It would be great if your team was full of guys who both were not ignorable on offense and not targetable on defense. That is the goal of any team. But I like the Pacers, there are defensive metrics that peg Haliburton as like pretty bad defender. And I would probably take issue with them just because he's such a good deflections defender and such a canny off the ball defender. He can play passing lanes. Steals are always valuable, but they're more valuable for him because of how good he is at hitting that or converting that into transition and finishing. But he's skinny. He's always going to be skinny. He's never going to be an all defense player. There's always going to be force that he is giving up in isolation. And so I think weak link theory, you could apply that to him and say that he is a weak link. Likewise, Myles Turner, who I think's defensive out reputation has sort of exceeded his output for a couple years now, also could be seen as a bit of a weak link, as a defender for a bunch of reasons. He doesn't have exceptional size. A really good ball handler can get by him, and he relies a bit too much on recovery and whatever. But even though they had a nominal weak link defender at point and let's say an average defensive center, so to speak, with he has strengths and weaknesses, but sort of an average defensive center, the Pacers found themselves again a game from the title in a game that I think they would have won. And I think the lesson to take away from that, obviously, is that you can't really boil it down to just, are you a weak link on defense? It has entirely to do with how much are you giving up versus how much you are adding. And it is clear that both Haliburton and Turner, even though they can give up a lot on defense, they can also do things that are defensively valuable. There is a threshold that they cross to the point where, I mean, you mentioned before in discussing the Pacers offense, how Turner, just his ability to pop and shoot, that alone, it is such a sort of turnkey for so much of what the Pacers could do that I think it is at least a discussion as to whether or not he was a more valuable playoff player this year than like Jared Allen, who to me is a far superior defender to Myles Turner, does a lot more things that I think both coaches and maybe like NBA nerds really gravitate to. And I'm one of them. I love Jared Allen. I love him. But the fact that Turner can just shoot as a 5 and guarantee that as long as he's on the floor, his team is going to have 5-out spacing, that alone, or maybe not alone, but on the back of that skill, that can cure so many ills, both individually within Turner's game and for his team, that it can sort of make that weak link theory a lot less firm or strong, and that's sort of what I think of when I think about that stuff. I think it can be applied on the wing a lot because maybe wing players don't have that sort of special sauce skill that centers do, because every wing in the NBA that is playable can shoot, whereas with centers there are still non-shooting bigs that exist. And so the marginal advantage is greater if you have a big who can shoot. But that's sort of what is sticking in my head, is that I think that theory is sort of papering over some potholes.
Yep, that's fair. And for whatever it's worth, I think this is maybe stating the obvious, but like having strong defenders or plus defenders or whatever, the 2, 3, 4, that's how you can also like paper over some of these
Of
other
course. Yeah.
New York does this with Brunson. The Pacers with Nembhard, Nesmith, and Siakam can, those guys can cover holes and plug gaps and be in great help positions, and then how that reduces some of the strain Haliburton might have from a like matchup standpoint, and then allows the Pacers to just like squeeze as much of the sort of like off ball feel, deflections, transition, initiation that Haliburton can get from that. That's like the setup that like the Hornets need to be probably thinking about too, with regards to Lamelo, because like that's the stuff he does well defensively too. When he's
Right.
not like gambling, like he's a good long rebounder, which can also lead to transition. He gets steals, he can make plays in gaps, and his feel for the game, his anticipation skills can show up on that side of the floor too. It's just in sort of these different kind of ways. And for him, it just like it's to me, it's less sort of like him getting better defensively on the ball, which is a part of it, but is also just like cutting out some of the like needless gambles. And then just that allows him to just like really benefit from the other things he does as a team defender. Um,
Well, and you wanted to talk about, you mentioned the Hawks as a team that has stuck out to you in their off-season
yeah.
construction, as they have for like lots of people, obviously. I mean, not just for that draft night trade they got from the Pelicans, but that's when you talk about papering over on the wings, Dyson Daniels, Reese Shea, Nikhil Alexander Walker now all acquired basically within the last 12 months.
Mhm.
And they still have Jalen Johnson there. Like they acquire Porzingis for the sort of 5 out element that they lacked.
Mhm.
That would seem to be a team that are taking some of these lessons to heart, knowing that they have Trae Young, who is probably as targetable, so to speak, as
Yeah.
anyone else. And part of targeting is like targeting for another team. It's not like automated. Targeting takes its own skill, being able to bring someone into the action and get that switch the way that you want it and execute over and over and over again. Like I know that the Thunder brought Haliburton into a bunch of actions, but the Pacers are also very good at ball denial. They're very good. They were very good at speeding Gilgeous-Alexander up early in possessions so that they maybe could not get into going after who they wanted. Maybe the person who's going to be targeting Haliburton was, I don't know, Aaron Wiggins or something. And
Mhm.
that's the mismatch they choose. And then the Pacers live with that.
Yeah.
So it has its own skill. And the more defenders that you have, like the Hawks have acquired, theoretically, the harder it's going to be to pick on someone like Trae. Theoretically. But how do you think about are you like as in as a lot of optimists are on the Hawks offseason to the point where you think they've sort of elevated a level in terms of their contention for like next year, let's say a 2-year window?
It's interesting because I think not to like I'm going to answer the question. I think they potentially have, but it's not because of just like what they've done on the sort of like the wings to like load up and like maybe mitigate some of Trey's concerns defensively. Like the swing for them is like if Porzingis is like healthy and good. Because like he's the guy who like when he played the last 2 seasons for Boston, he made them unstoppable.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows? Like maybe he's just he dealt with injuries during that stretch. He barely made it to the finish line in the playoffs 2 years ago. He had whatever weird concern was causing him issues in the playoffs. Just a few months ago. But like and this is sort of one of the keys, a superior version of this offensively than Turner is, but just like it's not just that like Porzingis is like a pick and pop guy. It's not just that like Porzingis is like a pick and pop like quick fire, quick trigger guy, but it's that Porzingis can also like dive to the rim and he can catch in space and he can also like play above the rim as like a lob threat. Like I think
And post up. He could
in
post up
in
too.
in
Yeah.
post up, so just like against the switch he could do that. Um and look, these guys don't, obviously these kinds of players like don't grow on trees, but just the sort of like the what it does for an offense to have a like high volume screen setter at the 5 that can threaten going to doing all kinds of different stuff and can really like bend different coverages and can like if you want to switch, Porzingis will go to the post. If you're in the drop, he's gonna pop. If you're putting 2 on the ball, he can pop or he can play on the short roll, like whatever it might be. And then you have a guy like Trae who's a genius with the basketball and an exceptional passer and incredibly can make plays with both hands and obviously like has the sort of like off dribble shooting abilities to like geek out coverages too. Just like I think the hope for them internally probably is that like Kongwu is like becomes the guy because he's like the homegrown drafted guy and But
Sure.
Porzingis to me is just like the man. If he's like, if he's himself, and maybe that's a huge if, that just jumps their offense up, and that
Hmm.
opens up more room for Dyson Daniels as a cutter. That opens up more room for Jalen Johnson as a slasher, and like he can benefit in this pick and roll capacity as well with Porzingis. Um, and you think about a team like Atlanta, like how they want to space the floor, like the way that they play five out is similar to the way a team like the Utah Jazz will play five out. So honestly, it's similar to like what the Hornets and what Duke will do as well, spacing the five on the wing, which is
Mm.
something that we're seeing more and more. I think Quinn Snyder gets a lot of credit for that. I think Will Hardy with the Jazz gets a lot of credit for that. I've basically have found every clip and every interview I can online about Will Hardy talking about like his ideas of like five out spacing and sort of like how they developed this system in Utah. And it's been built in a way where like you can have a non-shooting five space the floor on the wing. Like Atlanta, it was Capella and Okongwu last year. And I guess Okongwu was flirted with, a
Yeah,
catch.
Mo Gay a little bit here and there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a nice player, by the way, who was in the Hornets summer league a couple of years ago. But like because of where they're spacing and because how those guys can be used as handoff hubs or setting flare screens or setting down screens, like if the opposing team is not going to guard them out to the 3-point line, then you can take advantage of some of that spacing in different pockets of the floor, like not in the paint necessarily, but you can take advantage of that by creating 2-on-1s along the perimeter with flare screens and handoffs and down screens. Like I was just saying, it can also help you with some of your double drag pick and roll, some of your other sort of like spread pick and roll sets as well. But if you have a shooter that can also do that too, like someone like Porzingis, well, then you can just open up the paint. Like you can just create that type of like five out spacing that then would allow you to like really excel at this kind of like random basketball that we started the podcast talking about. Like
Yeah.
that was sort of when I was talking about like what Turner can do is that like they had in Carlisle's an offensive genius. So it's like they've got great plays to draw up and stuff like that. But I think when you hear any of these coaches talk, and I've talked with John Shire at Duke about it, I've heard Will Hardy talk about it, like they want these guys to be like reacting in real time and like making reads. They don't want to just come up and run horns 25. Like they want these guys give them a read and just boom play out of it. And one of the things I heard Will Hardy talk about, he was saying like how some of the go-to plays that they run out of this five out set that like the players in Utah just came up with them
Yeah.
by just like playing out of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really impressive. So like Utah's a team that I have my eyes on them going into the future, and I'm like really excited to like watch Will Hardy develop as a coach. I'm really in on him going forward. But yeah, just
Shout out Bryce Sensabaugh. Still got my eye
yes,
on Bryce and
it
Taylor Hendricks if he comes, if he comes back strong, which I hope that
he
he does.
he's gonna fingers crossed. And I thought Bryce actually had some nice. I've watched a fair amount of Jazz basketball this offseason and have like enjoyed. There's some fun like Kyle Filipowski, Bryce Sensabaugh two-man game stuff to dive into. So I'm excited. He's wired to score. But that's
Hmm.
sort of my thought is that Porzingis is the ticket to creating to like really like making teams think about where they put their defensive five, where like X5 is going to be against Atlanta, because like
Hmm.
his randomness is you don't know what he's going to do. Is he going to slip? Is he going to dive? Is he going to pop? Is he going to short roll? Is he not even involved in the action? And then you got
Hmm.
to deal with Trey Young turning the corner too. And you've got shooters and cutters, dotting the perimeter.
Well,
So
there's also, I think, a possibility in Atlanta. And this is, this is really sort of, we're dreaming on the Hawks. This is like everything about the Hawks that people are hoping for comes true.
mhm,
But there's a world where you could play Jalen Johnson at the five for
mhm,
like not, huge minutes, but in
mhm.
the right matchup, you could run Trey, Nikhil. Like Nikhil is on that team. I don't think maybe it's just me who hasn't thought about Nikhil Alexander Walker enough on that team, but he's been a big part of that Minnesota defense and that Minnesota playoff defense for multiple years. And to that point in a minute, but Trey, Nikhil, Dyson, who is a set and forget in your sleep all defense player
Yeah.
until like as long as he is healthy.
Yeah.
Risache, if you believe that Risache can really hang, which I am still skeptical about, but he's young. And I think he had an encouraging enough rookie season. But Risache and Jalen Johnson, that's five. You could, if against the right team, if nothing else, that is very, very difficult to guard. Now, if you wanted to have maybe against a bigger team, if you're really trying to avoid that sort of weak link theory argument, and you feel good enough about Dyson as an initiator and Nikhil as an initiator and Jalen Johnson as an initiator, and you want to bench Trey Young because you're in really, really, really high stakes,
Mhm.
well, now you could go Dyson, Nikhil, Risache, Jalen Johnson, Porzingis, and have that five. And they'll have to score, but they'll play five out. And, that like there's just now multiple routes. And I think the point that I was trying to get to earlier in talking about how it's not necessarily easy to target Tyrese Haliburton, even if it's on the scouting report. It's not easy to do that successfully. And in order to do it, you're probably taking yourself out of your normal offense, whereas the Pacers refuse to be taken out of their normal offense. Like it will never happen unless you are the Thunder and you have the best defensive personnel in the league. So you are even if you are quote unquote hunting Tyrese Haliburton, you are going to an abnormal or maybe like an option B offense, whereas the Pacers are permanently in their option A, which is
Mhm.
going to be a difficult math problem to solve. The Hawks, up until this point with Trey, have always been a team where I think it was easier to target Trey for one reason or another. Part of that is personnel related in terms of I think they had some offensively tilted guys on that roster around Trey who weren't going to be as good at, ball denial and ground coverage as guys like Neesmith or, Siakam
Mhm.
Nemhard are in Indy. That's an aging Bogdan Bogdanovich. That's DeAndre Hunter, who's more of like a mirror defender. Those kinds of guys. I think it's partly that. And I also think the criticism that Trey did not spend enough time off the ball and was too ball dominant, which is something we opened up talking about, in terms of different kinds of low turnover players. I think that there I think that a real dynamic playing out of that is it translates to defense. I think that players are naturally a bit more engaged if they are involved in the offense a little bit more. I think a democratized offense leads to a higher effort, more democratized defense. And if you've got a lot of guys who are standing around while Trey does spread pick and roll over and over and over again, then on the other hand, and I'm not making a comment on their effort. I think it's just basketball nature. I think it's harder to have a defense where they can cover for him on defense so aggressively and keep him out of bad spots. It also saps Trey's own personal energy as a defender to keep himself out of those spots. And
Mhm.
so now, theoretically, if last year was sort of the first step in stepping up Trey's off ball offense, there could be a downstream effect where that has a beneficial impact on defense, a marginal one, but
Mhm.
these margins matter. And now with the personnel of having Nikhil, and I'm still pocketing Nikhil because I want to talk about the Wolves in a second.
Mhm.
Um, Now having the personnel where it's going to be easier to cover for him, so to speak, I think you can squint Snyder. Sorry for doing that. And you can maybe see a style of play that feeds back into itself in a healthier way than previous Snyder Young collaborations have been in Atlanta. That's if I were a Hawks fan, that would be sort of the nirvana I'm chasing. Is there a style of play now that this personnel can execute where the offense can feed into the defense and vice versa in a more sort of you use the word organic, but just a more mutually beneficial way. That's
Hmm.
what I'm kind of interested to see.
Yep. Yep. I think the just to like put a pin in this with the Hawks, like I'm probably not like a full blown optimist on them, but I am like I like their process. And
Yeah,
obviously like the deal that they made with the Pelicans during the draft, that was a great bit of business on their part that sort of fell into their lap. But just like they have they seem to have a like coherent plan, and like there's a map. And even getting a guy like, Asa Newell out of Georgia, you can see how he could fit into this sort of like front court pick, switchy defender, hustle guy that could potentially be
right.
be a helpful piece in this process as well. The Hawks also like it's one of the benefits of getting Trey off the ball is that like he can work in these inverted actions with Dyson Daniels, these inverted actions with Jalen Johnson,
Of course.
and that's cool because not only do the Hawks have multiple guys who can like organize offense and bend defense, and it's really Trey and Jalen are the two main guys, and just everything else that they can kind of get out of just the sort of like 5 out ecosystem. But the fact that they can use those guys together is huge. You can stagger them, and then when they're on the court, they can bounce off of one another. Like
Hmm.
I think one of the like many cheat codes that OKC has tapped into, one is they don't have to hide any of these guys defensively. SGA, is a good, solid defender, gets a lot of steals. Jalen Williams, awesome defender. Everyone else, insane defender, on the roster. Chet,
Everyone else is all defense. Yes, that's
yeah.
right.
But just like but then on the flip side, like they have these two like top billing guys who can run offense with SGA and Jalen Williams, but those guys can play off of one another really. Like they can be involved in actions together too. And so like if you wanted to just speak on the Hawks like in favor of them anymore, is that like the more Trey is also willing to like accept like sort of like a slight shift of his role offensively and to be a guy who's willing to screen. And if you can convince him that that's going to help his own offensive game up, like it can really unlock. I mean, it's just, I hate that guy. I say that term too much, but like it can really be beneficial for guys like Johnson and Daniels as ball handlers too. So that's sort of like another avenue towards them becoming like a top whatever offense.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I'm in it with the Hawks, and then you just sort of said it, but like the lineup versatility component with what they can do with Reese Shea, with Johnson, maybe with Newell if he's a part of the picture, like that kind of stuff is all really positive
Yeah.
as well.
Certainly. I there's more to say on the Hawks, but I want to I mean maybe they'll come up a bit in this little point. But we were speaking earlier about how having a spacing five, like a comfortable one like Turner. Yeah, it's so funny. I think Turner all of a sudden got some grief once he signed that deal with Milwaukee. Like first of all, good for Myles Turner for, you know, getting as much money as he could. Good work by his agents to sort of conjure that out of thin air. Um, but like as soon as soon as that deal was done, especially since it came with the obviously the precursor in terms of stretching Dame, all of a sudden, like that's when the detractors started piping up about Myles Turner's defense. I shouldn't say detractors. Like brilliant people like Caitlin Cooper were talking about Miles's defense as long as he was on the Pacers and bringing up very valid critiques. I don't mean to say that there was like an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Far from it in that respect. I just mean that I think the Pacers were, I think, quietly applauded by saying like you got rid of maybe a not quite so essential guy as it may have seemed. And they're, now they have Jay Huff, and Jay Huff is a nerd favorite. I like Jay Huff a lot. I also like, 446 out of the 450 NBA players quite a lot. Um, and Isaiah Jackson is fun, like him as much as the next guy, that's fine. But and I think now that since the Bucks are sort of not as popular a team in media circles and in like nerd circles, And I understand why. I mean, they roster Kyle Kuzma, who I'm not a fan of, and they roster Kevin Porter Jr., who like no one's a fan of, including me. He's one of the
Yeah,
four who I'm not really about.
same.
So I think that sort of stink went on Myles Turner kind of immediately, especially since Dame is still a beloved guy for whatever you want, for whatever the on-court limitations are now. Still a beloved guy, huge name. I think the media loves him. Dame's always been very good to the media. And so I think Myles got a little bit of a cold shoulder with the announcement of that signing, but I still kind of think that ability to space is just going to serve the Bucks pretty well. Is it going to take them to like 55 wins? Probably not. But
Mhm.
it might take them to a good enough place where maybe they can win a series, maybe with some injury luck. Who knows? And then Giannis stays again, and that's probably worth a whole hell of a lot in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that about Myles Turner, that like a spacing five is a spacing five is a spacing five, and that is going to help the Bucks. Even though like Brook technically was that, and they did space him in the corner plenty.
Mhm.
Like Myles is just in his prime in a way that Brook is not, and can play longer for longer stretches.
Yeah.
Now there are, I think the equivalent, since there are still bigs who just straight up do not shoot threes and will not shoot threes confidently, and like Malawach was a guy that Duke spaced on the corner, but like didn't really make any threes and is still sort of a very theoretical shooting five. And he went 10th in the draft to Phoenix. There are still these guys where it's going to be a long road until they get where maybe the teams want them to go as shooters. That is a huge marginal advantage. I think another marginal advantage is having players on the wing who are truly comfortable hitting those flow actions, attacking, and like court mapping, like we talked about before. Because there are still plenty of guys who fit into what maybe is still called the 3-and-D archetype, a term I've never really liked. I think at minimum it should have been called D and 3, because I think the defense is the harder skill to find. There's lots of players who can shoot threes. There's not many who can defend at a level that you need in the playoffs. But the players who are uncomfortable putting the ball on the deck, okay, if you are uncomfortable in doing that, then the defense can, like, modern advanced defenses on a string can weaponize that against you in the playoffs, and they can gain very important advantages by just counting on you to not punish them on a closeout.
Mhm.
I think actually with the Hawks, that is something to keep in mind with Risache, who is a good cutter, but I'm still pretty dubious of him putting the ball on the deck and doing anything other than kind of a contested floater, which he can hit some of those shots, but we'll see. We'll see if his timeline actually aligns, or if he actually maybe becomes part of a trade for a guy that they really look
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
Um, do you think that there is, and if the Hornets come to mind, then by all
Mhm.
means, but do you think that there is a team that has these sort of title aspirations that maybe still has that player on the wing uh that teams can leverage against? I kind of, and I'm not going to go on a big thing, but I kind of think of the LA Clippers, who have kind of turned themselves into a specialist
Mhm.
on each end of the spectrum. Harden, an offensive specialist, Chris Dunn, a defensive specialist, Derrick Jones
Yeah.
Jr., a defensive specialist, Batum at his age, kind of a defensive specialist. I think sort of polarized teams like that um, maybe are ones that have put a ceiling on themselves a little bit, because they don't necessarily have the personnel to hit that sort of nirvana state offensively. But I don't know if there's any other team that pops out to you.
Trying to think any other team that sort of pops out along this line. Hmm. I mean, I think just think going through teams in the league. I mean, I think a team like golly, who do I go with here? I mean, a team. I know. Is it like too easy to say a team like Houston that's still trying to figure things out with Amen Thompson?
Sure.
like
Well,
sort of
yeah. I
sort of
mean,
like,
look,
you know,
they just traded for Kevin Durant. They're all in. So if
yeah.
this is a limitation, it's an important one. Yeah, for
And
sure.
I know they do things in sort of in terms of like roster or lineup, you know, construction to sort of like offset some of that stuff, but also like, you know, Houston just sort of like doubled down on, you know, playing like murder ball in the playoffs with some of these double five lineups. So
That's
they'll just sort of like dial it even
yeah,
further. So,
non-shooting double fives at
yeah.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's that part of it too. I mean, if Franz Wagner never finds this I'm very bullish on. I love Franz, and I think
I
I
do
can't
too.
wait to see him more and Paolo more. But like, you know, if that struggled to continue to be a thing, I mean, maybe that's something else to slightly be a little concerned about. This isn't quite the same thing, but so I don't want to deviate off this because I'm curious if you have any suggestions. Like, um, I'm a little like we were just talking about Turner. I'm a little curious to know like how he'll be used next season. I think yes, it's great to have a stretch five and a guy who can do different things, but just like to me, so much about what made Turner's like shooting and stretch components impactful was that like it was being done next to Haliburton. You know,
Hmm.
this guy that could like really, really like string defenses along and pressure them in certain ways that could like really maximize the kind of space that in shooting windows and play in you know scoring opportunities that a guy like Turner would have. And just like obviously Giannis is incredible, but like the Bucks don't have a guard sort of like you know obviously no one in Halliburton's universe, and I'm not really sure like who sort of like their go-to pick and roll initiator is going to be um, next season. So those are maybe a couple I could think of.
Shout out Ryan Rollins, my man. Shout out Ryan
I
Rollins.
do have liked him since college. Good contract for the Bucks to bring him back this offseason. Uh, kind of like a sneaky good athlete, guard defender. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe do you have any concerns, sort of like with how like a team like Cleveland is shaped? I know there's this sort of like much maligned
Yeah.
for like roster construction, like what are they going to do with Allen and Mobley and Garland and Mitchell, and like can they squeeze enough defense out of their like wing position to like really make this thing sing? I mean, maybe they're another one, but like all of those guys are awesome players, so it's like
They are.
I really
They
don't like I
are.
can't like critique them individually all that much. Yeah.
I think the thing with Cleveland, and I mean I brought up Allen purposefully in comparing him to Turner because Allen is such a valuable regular season player. It's so clear that he is. Um that alone might, you know, just mean that he's more valuable than Myles Turner because Turner still is dependent, like you said, on
Mhm.
the all NBA lead guard. But Cleveland, I think the reason you hear that like teams aren't afraid of Cleveland, blah 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 blah, like whatever, who knows where those quotes come from. But the three teams that have beaten them in the playoffs in this Mobley Mitchell era, are the three teams that have been to the conference finals, which are the Celtics, the Pacers, and the Knicks. Those are the only three teams that have made the conference finals the last 2 years, and they're the teams that beat the Cavs. That's number one. Number two is that the Cavs only really have one player who will have like pronounced uh physical advantages chained to his size, which is Mobley. Like he can cover more ground and be more explosive and just twitchier at 7 feet than whoever his lineup counterpart is. Donovan Mitchell is an insane athlete, but he is like an undersized too.
Mhm.
And Jared Allen is an excellent center, but he gets a lot done through like guile and his mind. You know,
Mhm.
he's not any sort of an athletic freak. Garland's undersized, and their leftover wing, their most athletic wing on that team is probably DeAndre Hunter, I'm guessing, and he's not exceptional in that department. So I think it's because they don't see a team like opponents don't see a team that is going to necessarily bully them. If anything, what the Cavs were able to do last year and what they did in the first round against Miami is like somewhat similar to the Pacers, but it was like we are going to play very, very fast in the half court, and you are constantly going to be a step behind our ball movement, um, which is like a very viable way to play and way to win. And they still might be able to do that. And if they go to Mobley lineups at the five when they need to, and those wing options are good enough, then maybe. I just tend to think that I if they're like, obviously they're not going to trade Donovan Mitchell. They would not do that, and how could you? But if they were to win, I'll put it this way. If the Cavs were to win, then it would be very impressive and I think counter to some of these trends. They have a non-shooting five. They have a like probably multiple quote unquote targetable players depending on who is their fifth starter, who is their fifth player on the floor, and how much are they playing Garland, and are you able to target Mitchell a little bit at his size? Like they so in order for them to win, they'd be going against some of that. And I think also their fifth starter is not, whether it's Hunter or Strus or whomever, they are not guys who are advanced decision makers off the dribble themselves. Like they're kind of giving something up in in their own kind of form of polarization. And by losing Ty Jerome, by the way, he was another one who sort of injected that pace of play that I think they were very reliant on in beating these other teams. And so I'm not writing the Cavs off by any measure. They also were injured in the playoffs, and maybe they get healthy for a playoff run. But I think there are league trends kind of working against them. That's all. And I think if they wanted to like drastically reshape their roster, it would be hard for them to get the value they would want in a trade, because the acquiring team would know that they're
Yeah.
making these trades because they couldn't get over the hump. So,
I think that's one of the reasons why they continue to run it back. I mean,
right,
one, it's like it's so much talent, which but mainly it's because like what lever would you pull? And
right.
how would you do it? What would it look like? And yeah, just like what sort of like cascading effects or setbacks does that end up having up and down your roster? I like they're really fun to watch in part because they sort of like zag against some of these other sort of like league wide trends, yet they're like very contemporary on offense as well too. So I think they're gonna be like a beast next season. I think they'll probably win the East, but yeah, be curious to sort of see what their like championship in like postseason equity, how that sort of like charts throughout the season. But man, if
Hmm.
they're healthy going into the postseason next year, I'm feeling to me like the biggest issue for them really has been health, and I think there's some other things that we just sort of touched on that matter. But for really, it's just like you got to get Garland healthy for an entire playoff run here and sort of like see what that looks like.
Yeah. You know, I agree. The Cavs sort of owe it to themselves to give it a real shot. I mean, and this would be the year, Pacers out, Celtics out,
Yeah,
Sixers are maybe out forever. Who knows? Giannis is still kind of in no man's land with his roster. This would be their year, but
yeah.
it's it's
Can,
you know, lots of teams think that a lot, and so we'll see. We'll see where it comes down with Cleveland.
can
Um,
uh can I ask you one, like this would be not Cleveland, and but can I ask
sure.
you one other, because this is something that I thought about earlier while we were talking. You said something talking about Haliburton. You had sort of mentioned how he and I believe Curry was the other name that you had thrown out. These are two guys, maybe the best in the league at sort of like, and please like correct me if I'm not sort of like describing what you put forth accurately, but just
Yeah,
like
I will
the
delete you immediately from this
yeah,
episode.
but like those were sort of like the two best guys at sort of like understanding how the pieces fit offensively
Yes.
and being able to, through their talents, through their unselfishness, through their sort of like understanding of like basketball scheme, what their coaches want, etc. like they're the best at just sort of like maximizing. Chris Paul was maybe some version of this for a long
Sure.
time too, but just sort of like maximizing the team's sort of like overall impact in the half court and sort of like taking on any role that they need to do to like create the most like efficient like offensive product. Is
And,
that
and and I would say particularly Rockets and Suns Chris Paul as he was
yes.
aging and
Yeah.
then had to move off the ball a little more. But
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
And another we sort of talked about this too, another sidebar, but just like another, low turnover, high dribble guy too.
Correct. Correct.
Throughout his career. But what do you think about like you just if Steph is sort of like the older version of this, Haliburton, obviously, unfortunately, out next season, but a guy that's basically entering into his prime. What do you think about like Cooper Flagg being like the next guy, like the next like this sort of like next link, the guy entering the league that's sort of like most likely to take to be the kind of guy that not to say like take the mantle from Halliburton because there could be multiple of these types of guys, but
Right.
just sort of like the guy like is that's part of like what makes him so appealing, right? Flagg is his like understanding and willingness to like fall into so many different roles offensively and to get things moving with with his own movement, with his scoring, and obviously with his like decision making and passing.
Well, not only will I not delete you from the feed, Brian, but that's a great plug for my draft piece that I wrote, which is on my Substack. It's called Cooper and Con and Off and On. It's about all of this stuff.
Okay,
Basically,
cool.
you would know better than me, but the way I summarized it was that the way that Flagg played at Duke is sort of the platonic ideal of how Cooper Flagg wants to play. Like he
Mhm.
was not miscast in the slightest there, except at the very end when they asked him to sort of play star ISO ball against the University of Houston. But apart from then, he wants to play with guards and connectors and players who thrive in this sort of flow decision making because that's not only how he likes to play, which is matters a lot for a number one overall pick, how you like to play, but it's also what maximizes his value because he does not have the best handle, coming out. He is still a developing shooter. So if you're thinking about the kinds of shots you would want Cooper Flagg taking, a contested off the dribble mid ranger would probably be number one. A contested
Mhm.
off the dribble three would probably be number two or whatever. And so you don't want to try to sledgehammer him into becoming an ISO superstar. You want him to become a superstar. You want the shortest path to superstardom for him. And I think the shortest path is to play in his preferred play style, which I don't think the Mavs are really set up to do this year
I
yet,
don't think they are
because
either.
I don't think they have the connectors to do it. But in the specific lineage of Curry and Halliburton, I think it would be. I don't think it would be the same way those guys do it, just because those
They're
two
such
are
good shooters, right?
exactly like
Yeah,
they are such all-time
yeah,
incredible shooters.
yeah, yeah.
But Flagg also provides a degree of defensive value that neither one of those two can really provide. So it would be a new variant of the theme, but the approach, yes, absolutely. And the
Yep.
reason I included Khan in sort of my article title is that, if you're looking for a shooting talent to pair with that feel, I mean, we did a whole episode practically on Khan and his star bet and what that looks like and how like fuzzy it can seem, but also how tantalizing it can seem. Khan is the one that marries that sort of court mapping and feel with just the three-level touch that is like top of the league level.
Yep.
And so that's something that I think is Khan next in terms of a Curry Halliburton thing. It's hard projecting that onto anybody, but I think that he has a really good like I think Khan's floor is very, very, very high. Like
Agreed.
he's called a high floor prospect, I think sometimes derogatorily, but I think he is a high floor prospect in the sense that like he is a high end starter at minimum,
Mhm.
high end, because what he does is so conducive to where the game is going. All this stuff that we're talking about, comfortable initiating as a wing, can play really, really, really fast and
Mhm.
commit to that play style in the half court or in transition. He understands the value of transition, and he can weaponize off ball gravity all of the time, which
Mhm.
is what is going to enhance his on ball gravity. Flagg, by contrast, his off ball gravity is not going to be there quite yet as a shooter. It's off ball gravity as a cutter, as a lob man, yes.
Mhm.
But that's, you know, Khan has a lot of really good tools to start off with. But to loop back to Cooper specifically, I think it's just going to be a weird wing version of that. And I think his coach, maybe Jason Kidd is that guy, though I have my doubts. Like his coach is just going to have to realize that you need to play him with these high field connecting guards, the way that Sion and Proctor and Khan were at the college level. Like that is how he's going to need to play with the NBA equivalent of those players. And I don't know. Once he hits that, could there be a version of Cooper who is like that? Maybe. I think it'd be interesting if Cooper would ever be the lead decision maker on his team.
Mhm.
I think, and being de facto point guard is not necessarily the same thing as lead decision maker. But what do you think? Do you think he could reach a point where the team is going off of his reads first and he's sort of like the domino knocking everything else over? Like he has the most gravity of any player on his team, and his reads are what is setting everything in motion, or is what is closing the most possessions, that sort of thing.
I I think it's possible, but um it would come with like an intentional like roster build and like offensive system construction around him
Yeah.
because it wouldn't look just sort of like obviously like nothing looks like Golden State's offense, and obviously the Pacers have a really great thing going with all of their ball screens and their 5 out too, but just like with for a flag offense, my thought is like it would need to be a 5 out type look. You would want to have like shooters and connectors. You'd want to have a at the 5 like a real threat, pick and pop roll, that kind of stuff. But like
Maxime Reynaud. Target him now. Go get him.
he but it's interesting that he like it's actually I whole other conversation too. I think it's interesting that Charlotte went Kalkbrenner over Reynaud. I understand why they
Very.
did it,
Yeah.
but it's I'm a little shaky on it, but I like Kalkbrenner just fine. He's an okay prospect, but yeah, I think it's possible with Flagg, but just like it won't look like it won't be a team where he's running like 100 pick and rolls per game, like that kind of stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like
Of course.
it will
No.
have him in a setup where like it's 5 out, he's initiating in the middle of the floor while actions are firing on both sides, which is just like that's like what Duke had this season.
Right.
I think
Right.
and I think on the next level you can get to a version of that. I just don't think it's going to happen in the next 2 seasons. You know what I mean? Like, and it's going to take some time to develop it. And where
Yeah.
Dallas is, it's also why like this would have been. It's why it would have been more. It would have been very interesting if Cooper had landed in Charlotte or Utah or whatever. These teams that would have been sort of like ready to like start cultivating that system around him.
Right.
Instead, he's going to have to like copy and paste into what Dallas is doing.
Although I would say the best case scenario is that since Dallas is going to give him point guard reps, he just plays this way anyway because he's
Yeah.
like, this is how
Yeah.
we're playing. And
Yeah.
because he's the guy, whether or not Dallas recognizes a nut, like ask Nico Harrison, like, who's the future of your team? He might say it's Anthony Davis for all we know.
Yeah.
So, like, whatever, like
Yeah.
two-way street. But if all of that is taken care of and Cooper just plays the way that Cooper plays, and he's like, this is the type of initiator I am going to be. Like, I want to play with Najee Marshall 98% of the time because he and I are on the same wavelength.
Mhm.
Then maybe it happens quicker, and maybe
Mhm.
that he greases the wheels a little bit to have the roster, again, not intentionally, not in a militant way, but maybe the roster turns over a bit more quickly than we're hoping because we
Yeah.
see that that's how he likes to play.
Yep. Yep. Agreed.
Yeah, the only other lesson uh I've hinted at a couple times that I wanted to get at is, and I guess we've sort of mentioned it in the negative by talking about other related problems. It has to do with the Minnesota Timberwolves. And the
Mm.
Timberwolves are a positive example here. I'm not saying this to dump on the Timberwolves, but a playoff lesson that I've got from them, also from the Thunder, but it's been more pronounced just because I think of the kinds of series the Timberwolves have played and the kinds of ball handlers they've played against. But like, there's a 2-year sample now where they have played the Nuggets, the Lakers, and then like kind of the Warriors, but Steph got hurt and you can't,
Yeah.
it's hard to apply it fully to that series.
Yeah.
But they, with their degree of athleticism on the wing, uh, and their switchability, have the personnel to make to completely tilt series in their favor just by torturing lead guard ball handlers, unless your lead guard ball handler is like a first team all NBA guy,
Yep.
basically SGA. So Jamal Murray, toast. Austin Reeves, toast. And then sort of the injured old version of Jimmy Butler when Steph was out, toast,
Mhm.
more or less. Like, their ability to just incinerate that matchup is very interesting to me. I like Minnesota a lot. They're gonna miss Nikhil leaving, but they have been very intentional in the draft about only getting guys who are like over 6'8" and or only getting guys who run like a sub 4.3 40. So,
Yeah.
Jalen Clark, Terrence Shannon, Dillingham is sort of their Hooper swing, but Berenger, these guys athletically are absolutely insane. And I applaud the Wolves for committing to this sort of like ground coverage, modern athleticism identity. And I mean, that their identity is like set in stone. They are going to be a nightmare for opposing ball handlers unless you are the best of the best. And so the lesson, number one, it's hard to find all of those athletes, but I like that Minnesota prioritizes them. I think the conversation to have is if your team employs a ball handler that is like good, but maybe it's a secondary ball handler like Reeves who plays off of Luka, who is more offensively tilted than he is defensively tilted. He's not quite sort of the switchblade type that's what I call him, but whatever. Your Nemhard, your
Mhm.
Cason Wallace, your Dort, Suggs, Herb Jones, Derek White, Drew Holiday. If all those guys are defensively tilted, and I think I wrote in my draft piece that in the playoffs, starting with round 2, if you had not made an all-star game, then the players who started were like either all defense or they'd been all defense in the past. Like, that's just the players who started on these teams. Anunoby, Bridges, uh, whatever. McDaniels, Jaden McDaniels on the Wolves. So, um, what do you think about that? About in terms if you're filling out the supporting roles on your team, getting away from maybe what was from a big three era where you're trying to stack offensive talents together, where a really good offensive talent like an Austin Reeves could be very valuable for a lot of teams. But if you're trying to build a title team, that player might actually sink you because your team has
Mhm.
come to rely on them. And you're going to run into one of these freight train defensive teams that just evaporate that player. And you can apply that to the Cavs or to like
Yeah.
whomever. But what do you think about, and I'm calling it the Wolves. I'm making the Wolves the locus of this, but like the Thunder, obviously this applies to them as well. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. It really is. Obviously, you need to be intentional about every dollar that you're putting towards a roster spot. But it's like if you're a team that profiles as a title contender, you're looking at probably two, minimum sort of like two all-star level, creator, offensive player types. But then it's like you really need to be intentional with like what are going to be like the third and fourth and fifth like largest salary spots
Mm-hmm.
on your roster and on your cap sheet, and then thinking about how many ways you can like, as opposed to just like purely like reducing like skill overlap, thinking about ways that you can complement those and like support it. And I think we talked a lot at the start of this pod, sort of like on how the balancing act, um, in terms of like the half court offense and how that can be complementary basketball with the defense. This to me feels, if you're using the Wolves, it's really leaning even more into the sort of like offensive and defensive components of this. But yeah, overall, just really thinking about beyond your top two guys, your top two offensive players, like what are you doing with your roster 3 through 8, through 10, because this got talked about a ton during the season, during the playoffs, during the finals, like depth, lineup versatility. Those are two of the things that really made teams like Minnesota, a team like the Thunder, the Pacers, so dangerous compared to a team like New York that didn't have that type of like lineup versatility or whatever. But the way you do that is by, I guess, obviously valuing, your draft picks and valuing some of your smaller like team building tools, but then also like thinking even towards the top of your cap sheet, like what are you doing with some of like the larger ticket numbers on that, and can you find guys um, that can give you athleticism, that can give you defense, that can give you all of the sort of like shooting and decision making components we talked about in the sort of like the majority of this recording. So, and yeah, I mean, like with a team like Minnesota, having Edwards and McDaniels, just insane to have those types of athletes on the wings, and like pairing that with Gobert at the rim. Yeah, like that is hell on earth for opposing ball handlers. Like
Yeah.
they're turning they're I mean they're turning off like water at the rim, and then they're heating you up at the point of attack with all these guys. And if you have Edwards on you, then McDaniels is in the gap, and if you've got McDaniels on you, then Edwards is in the gap, and that's like really a lot to deal with for an opposing creator.
Well, and I would shout out Detroit a little bit here. Not fully. They don't have the same level of personnel, but I think Cade and Asar, and when they play him, Ron Holland,
Yep.
like they there's a level of perimeter, first of all, just like smarts, because
Mhm.
Cade and especially Asar, or I should say Asar and especially Cade, are like big time brainiacs in terms of defensive communication and rotation and just help. But I could see them being sort of like a JV Eastern Conference version of some of this in terms of seeking out that way to play, especially since, you know, Asar has his shooting issues and Bickerstaff is not the most sophisticated offensive coach. Like if they want to build an identity that wins playoff series in the short term while Bickerstaff is there, it's going to be on the defensive side of the ball. And so I could see them trending in that direction, which is very, very interesting. They've also drafted at the top of, or not at the top. They've had, Cade was their number one overall pick, but they've had three number five picks in a row. You would hope they would get some very good athletic personnel to sprinkle that through. So it's not, that hasn't necessarily been a masterpiece of team building and it's spanned two different front offices. But at least I think the theory is there. And in Cade, they have the guy where your lead initiator is not is like not targetable. He has sort of that SGA defensive perhaps kind of upside where he can be a very, very good defender and still lead an offense, not to the same level that Shea can, but nonetheless lead a playoff offense and like make your clutch decisions and make some clutch shots. So I would look at them perhaps. I don't know if
Mhm.
this is the year where it happens. They still got to figure out what they're doing with Jaden Ivey. They still got a lot of youth on that team, but they are big and they are nasty. So shout out Detroit is what I would say.
That's a really good one. Having Thompson back in the fold is super exciting. Having Holland with he carved out a little role for him last season as one of the youngest guys in the league on the playoff team, which was super impressive. And he, in theory, should be stepping into a larger role this season as well. And to even think about some of the like strength athleticism they have at the in the 4 or the 5 spot too with Duran and Stewart, like it's a it's a very fun roster, a lot of talent and a lot of like athletic, nastiness too, which
Yeah.
like yeah, that had kind of has become Minnesota's calling card, like, during the like Ant Edwards ascent into this team becoming just like a consistent playoff threat.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I could keep going, Brian. Like, I always want to talk for 20 minutes about Neek Clifford and all the different like little archetypes we've discussed that I feel like Neek is going to fill in Sacramento.
Mhm,
Um, your Hornets won Summer League. Shout out to them. I feel like we have done a good job talking about them. I
mhm,
guess I will end with the Hornets in saying that you mentioned earlier that like they don't profile to be a good team.
mhm,
Now, if you ask me, the easy spot to pick out with them is at center,
okay,
obviously. And that's valid for sure. I think if they wanted to really I think their win total, which last I checked, which was a while ago, but I don't imagine it's moved much. It's probably around like 25 and a half. I think that's where I saw them right around there. I think they are going to be better than that.
mhm.
Now, better than that might mean they win 32 games, which is still a 50 loss team, which is not great. But I think they're going to be better than 25 and a half. I and we mentioned Salon again in passing, somewhat derisively.
Mhm,
Uh, I think there's a lot where if he all of a sudden is goes from probably one of like the worst rotation players in the league, which he was last year, to a like a rotation player, maybe no better than average, maybe below average on a lot of nights, but isn't like bleeding you dry with his
mhm.
defensive positioning or whatever, with his decision making overall.
Yeah.
If he approaches just sort of rotation level and average, and all of a sudden I think their depth can start to look a little bit better. And I'm just so in on Khan to like possibly a harmful degree for my
Mhm,
listenership, but I'm just so in on him and the ability for him to help Lamelo get back to that sort of early career diet that you were discussing earlier in the podcast, that I think that alone could be worth, I don't know, 8 wins that you like may not seem like it. So what is sort of your absolute optimistic uh vision for the Hornets for this year, where like their win total, it's not like completely out of left field, but it definitely surpasses most people's expectations.
Yeah, it's probably like low to mid 30s, and maybe they're also, in discussions for like the 10th, the play-in type deal in a
Hmm.
weaker Eastern Conference. I think if that happens, a lot's gone right, namely just like the main guys have been healthy, and it's important to remember that Brandon Miller, who's been, was lost for the season in January. Like he's still recovering from a wrist injury. So, and he's still ramping up. Like he has not gotten back to, like, I think he's participating in some drills and some off-season stuff, but like he's not playing 5 on 5. with them.
Mm.
And that's an important piece for them. That's still going to be, heading into a crucial year three for him. Um, it's a lot of like missed development time, unfortunately, for Brandon. I know he's itching to get back out on the court. Um, but just like if they're hitting these 99th percentile type outcomes, it's like LaMelo's playing 70 plus games, Miller's playing 70 plus games. He's made some slight developments, and it's also probably like Khan is as good as advertised, and they're getting a big helping. They're getting good production from Bridges, and my guess would be another thing it would be contingent on would be Grant Williams coming back at some point and
There you go.
being like a healthy contributor for them, because like when I look at Charlotte's roster right now, like especially with Grant, he's coming back. He tore his ACL last November, so it's been basically 9 months. So like I'm not sure when he'll be back, but he'll be back at some point. But just like Grant coming back means a couple of things. One, it means they might not have to play Tijan Salon, because you could take the 48 minutes per game at the
Uh-huh.
four and divvy those up between Bridges and Williams. Like in the boom, Tijan's sort of on the fringes of the rotation. For whatever it's worth, I thought Salon looked better at Summer League in Vegas.
I did
I
too.
thought he was
Yeah.
more. I thought he looked stronger. I thought he was more physical. I thought he was more confident and decisive with the ball. I thought his catch and goes were good.
You
So
got to play with Knueppel,
that definitely. I mean, it doesn't hurt for sure, and
No.
especially if Khan setting you screens, and that's certainly going to be a big part of Khan's offense. Just like he helps get guys open, even when you're not running plays for him. He just screens and pops out, slips out, and that bends defenses and creates open looks. And certainly a guy like Tijan can benefit off that. But right now too, like you talked about the center rotation, like has three full-time centers on the roster with Diabate, Mason Plumlee, and Ryan Kalkbrenner. A rookie, older rookie, but a rookie out of Creighton. Those guys, salary wise, that's probably combined $7 million worth of salary. Like, I'm not sure there's any team in the league that has spent like less
I'm
on,
sure there isn't. Yeah.
like that. If there is, it can't be by much. I like a lot of the stuff Diabate does. I actually think he's like a nice rotation center, and
Yeah.
it's going to be super important for them next season. I see some of the vision with Kalkbrenner, especially with like what they want to do with him defensively, which is just like his play is going to be matchup dependent, but it's going to be like put Kalkbrenner on there and he turns off the rim for opponents by like whether he's playing like the deep drop or they're cross matching. That's something we saw them do in the Summer League Finals against Sacramento. They put Ryan Kalkbrenner on Devin Carter and just said stand in the paint. And like that's something that Charles Lee did, the Hornets coach did last season with his centers, putting them on non-shooters, and that's part of the vision with Kalkbrenner. I don't really think he has quite the sort of like quickness and twitchy sort of like reaction skills on the back line to like really be a destructive force there. But with his, he's a legit 7-1, and he's got good verticality. He doesn't commit lots of fouls. Like you can see the pathway for him like helping you in that regard. That to me still feels very like situationally dependent. So, um, but I would say if the Hornets are also still like hitting these like most optimistic projections, it's like Kalkbrenner is giving them like that plus maybe a little bit more, and
Yeah.
they're able to take those 48 minutes per game of center, and 40 of them are going to Diabate and Kalkbrenner, and then like there's Grant Williams getting some small ball 5 minutes, because right now like with Williams, if he's hurt or he's out or whatever, they don't really have like a small ball five option. It's like Salon kind of, maybe Bridges, but not
That's
really.
it's they're gonna play Salon. He was
Yeah,
drafted 6th overall a
I
year
know.
ago.
And look,
And
he
like,
he played better at Summer League too. He looked better. He just turned 20, like
right,
literally now. I think it's like his birthday is like right around now in
right,
August.
it
So
is. Yeah. And
he's
he's
very
he's
young.
never gonna lack for effort. It's not as though coaches are gonna be frustrated with his, willingness to work. He's a psycho. So
Mhm.
like he's gonna get opportunities. That's why it's weird to feel like this Hornets optimism is so pegged to Salon. But this is why whatever. I've said it a million times. I think Khan is such a signature player. I think that the trickle down effects, it's going to be about how he and Lamelo integrate. But if it's good, then it will make guys like Salah that much better. It'll make it so much more easier for like Josh Green in his minutes,
Mhm.
and lower the decision making burden that he would have had. I just think that there's enough there to where the Hornets, I as a play-in team, yeah, I think they could make the play-in in the East.
Mhm.
That's faint praise, but it's a lot better than 25 wins. So, yeah.
It's also worth noting, like, a portion of the, like, salon, like, doomerism such that it exists is, like, he got he got placed in a really bad situation last year, which is, like, he was supposed to spend most of the season playing with, like, the Swarm in Greensboro in the G League, and there were injuries to Bridges, to Grant Williams. The front court was just unbelievably banged up. There were trades made throughout the season. He was 19 years old. It was his age 19 season. He was coming from France. He physically wasn't ready for it. And like, but they had to play him. And so I guess it's good, potentially good that he got those reps, but it also meant like he was a bad young player on a bad young team. And so
Right.
like, no surprise it went terribly from
Badly. Yeah.
a production and efficiency standpoint. So part of the hope would be, and it's also not just Khan. It's also like, I mean, he's certainly the best version of this, but like drafting Liam McNeely late in the first round, another sort of like shooter, connector type, good decision maker. Sion James, we'll see if he can shoot it well enough, but another sort of like connective
I,
player, makes
I
good
love
decisions with the
Sion,
ball,
man. Yeah.
physical. He's just gonna have to be able to like threaten enough offensively. I think is sort of like what it comes down to, because I like his physicality. I like the drives, especially in the open floor.
But
And
he's also the guy who, like, I would just, he was such an obvious guy in the draft to me where it's like, we want our shooting coach to work with this guy because I don't know that his touch is good. His
Mhm,
form isn't broken. You just need to get him to speed it up and like
mhm.
really understand that triggers the difference between him playing and not playing in the NBA. So
Yeah.
far from like a lost cause offensively is Sion, but it's
Yeah.
so much potential to be a helpful player, in my
And
opinion.
and they invested. I mean, they used the 33rd pick on him. They gave him a
That's
full
right.
time contract, like, which I should isn't unexpected necessarily, but like there's some investment in him, and I know this is a guy that they like. I mean, no surprise they drafted him, whatever. But like, I know there's a fair amount of like optimism in
There
house
should Ed, there
about
should be
Sion
for
James.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. From the summer league to God's ears, Brian. That's right. No, thank you very much for your time as always. This was excellent. I wanted this to be a deep August episode. I think we certainly achieved that. I think anyone who's going on vacation or whatever has plenty of listening material. But Brian, is there any work from your fine Substack, or Split the Action, or anything else that people can look forward to from you as we get closer to sort of preseason?
Yes, I will be. We're taking a little bit of a break with the Hornets podcast, but I think sort of like starting, early mid September, leading into training camp. We'll start heating up with that. A lot of stereotypical, projections, that kind of stuff
Stereotypical.
coming into the season, which will be a lot of fun. I've been covering college hoops all off season at my Substack, Split the Action. I've been doing some freelancing stuff for 247 Sports. So last week I published like a big deep dive on Jordan Smith, who's a 5-star shooting guard in the 2026 class, the target of Duke. But I basically wrote about his performance with Team USA at the U19 World Cup this summer. I did a big deep dive scouting piece on Nick Kamenia, who's going to be a freshman forward at Duke next season. That looks to be a really fun, exciting player. I did a deep dive on Dame Sarr, 5-star, freshman wing from Italy, who's also at Duke. One of the other series that I'm going to be trotting out now with one of my freelance gigs with Pack Pride is sort of like a podcast video series over there called The Deep Drop. and
Oh,
NC State's assistant GM Patrick Stacy was kind enough to come on with me for the debut episode of that, which is up at Pack Pride's YouTube
oh,
page.
tremendous.
That was a lot of fun. It was cool to talk with Patrick about numbers that state is using for the transfer portal, for roster construction, for scheme development. And then it was just cool to sort of talk about philosophical stuff, team building wise, number wise. Stacy is a guy that previously worked in finance before getting into sort of like college basketball scouting, and then Will Wade plucked him from Wyoming to come to Raleigh. So fun guy to have on and to talk about some sort of like where college hoops is transitioning in a team in NC State that is really like upgrading in the analytics department, including with their general manager, Andrew Slater, who has come to Raleigh by way of the Oklahoma
Oklahoma
City
City
Thunder
Thunder.
too.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's how it goes. So yeah,
That
keep up with all of that. There's I'm sure some other stuff. I'll be contributing at basketball under review or basket under review this college basketball season, which is something that Trilly Donovan, Will Warren, some other sort of like college hoops nerds, a project that they have put together, which is a really, really cool site that's dedicated full time to college hoops. I had posted an article on Malik Brown a few weeks ago
Yep.
that went up there, and I'm writing something for them currently about Toby Lawal, who's a
Yeah.
veteran forward at Virginia Tech, who I like quite a bit. So I'll have coverage of mostly ACC hoops for them this season. So let's a mouthful, but I'm busy covering ACC hoops, the draft, and the Hornets here.
You are a spy on the streets, my man. Thank you so much. You're the best. Thank you all very much for listening. This has been Chucking Darts. It's okay to be wrong about sports. Find your dartboard and start chucking. Thank you.